Okay, we are here for our live 2020 Libertarian presidential debate here on The Exchange. I am joined today by Brian Nichols, who will be joining me and co-moderating the debate from the Brian Nichols Show. And I have with me the candidates who are here. We have Dan, Taxation is Steph Berman. We have Sam Robb, Adam Kokish, Mark Whitney, and Ken Armstrong. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me here tonight on the live stream here on Facebook, and we are also live on the YouTube channel. So to start the debate, we're going to do a introduction. Everybody gets a minute to introduce themselves, starting with Dan Berman. Dan, go ahead.
Hey, so I'm Dan, Taxation is Theft Berman. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I got to Texas as fast as I could, and now I identify as a Texan. And I'm running my campaign for President of the United States from down here in sunny Mexico. Why? Well, especially right now, there's a little bit more freedom down here. What can I say? It's the American dream. One thing that I want to focus on with this campaign and that we've been focusing on as libertarians is I want to make sure that we're changing the world and changing our political environment into one that has more libertarianism in it. That means I don't want to just grow the party by getting people in who don't understand the philosophy. I don't want to just get people to blindly support us. I want to grow something that's going to last a lot longer. I want to turn people into real libertarians, and we can do this. And we've been doing this with Democrats, Republicans, Bernie bros, Trumpsters, and everybody else. And really all it takes is just to connect with them and identify with their issues and show them real libertarian solutions. So especially right now, when people are on edge, they're worried about being able to pay their rent because we've been depending on this economy so much just for the basics of our survival. That we have no backup plan. We're not able to survive without the economy, and that's not the way things should be. And a lot of this is based on debt, which a lot of libertarians like to point out with the Federal Reserve and the banking system and everything that's in place. So this is a prime opportunity for us to attack that issue because now people who don't care about economics are paying attention. And that's where we've shifted our campaign in the last few weeks. So these are like the things I like to talk about, and hopefully we'll get a lot of good ideas out during the debate.
Thank you very much, Dan. Next up is Ken Armstrong. Ken, go ahead.
Hi there, everybody. Well, Ken Armstrong, Armstrong2020.com, and I'm talking to you from a log cabin here in the beautiful state of Washington. And I would like to point out that, I've been talking for a year about why my experience is important as a contingency planner with the government, as a healthcare executive with the government. And now all of a sudden we're in a situation where those things are so critically important. We're under the leadership in our government of a president who announced yesterday that his authority over the states is total. We've got a president who doesn't even understand the Constitution, who doesn't even understand what his job is. And frankly, he's destroying the economy of our country because he hasn't done the simple thing, the one simple thing that he should have done in the beginning: find out who's healthy so they can be out there going to work and doing all of the things that they need to do. We've got countries in Africa that are doing a better job than the United States at testing their people. So my job right now is to bring to you my experience as candidate for president of the United States.
Thank you very much, Ken. Just so everybody knows, when I throw my hand up, that means that the time is ticking down. Just want to make sure we get everybody in. Sam Robb.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sam Robb, samrobb2020.com, and I'm running for president because the country's headed in the wrong direction. We know that. It's been apparent for a long time, to libertarians especially. It's something that's been apparent for a good long time, but people today and with the pandemic are just starting to wake up to the fact that this is not the country that they thought they lived in. This is not the home of freedom that they thought they had. I just saw a news story about protesters who were gathered together respectfully, trying to maintain social distancing, but gathered together at the state house down, I think it was down in North Carolina, to protest the measures that had been put into place that were dispersed by the police. Now, I believe that the Bill of Rights, the very First Amendment, specifically says that the people are allowed to peacefully assemble to petition their government for the redress of grievances. And that is something that should be absolute core foundation part of what it means to be an American, is to go to your government and say, you're doing this wrong. And yet we're being told that we can't do that right now. People are starting to wake up. They're starting to see the cracks in the system. They're starting to see that there's a government in place that not only doesn't care about them, but actively hasn't cared about them for years. And they are ready for a change. And I think this is the opportunity for us as a Libertarian Party and for a president who can reach them and talk to them in terms that they understand, to bring a large number of people into the party.
All right. Thank you very much, Sam. Adam Kokesh.
Hey, Kevin, thank you so much for having us on and for putting this together, and to all my fellow candidates for joining us and being a part of an incredible team for the Libertarian Party for 2020. And I think what we need to do to take advantage of this opportunity that these guys are pointing out is nominate someone who represents a fundamentally different direction. And while it's true that I'm running for president, I'm running in order to abolish the position, to take the federal government through a peaceful, orderly, responsible bankruptcy process that leaves us with 50 independent states and up to 562 sovereign native nations. The difference between the Republicans and Democrats is like driving off a cliff at 80 miles an hour versus 90 miles an hour. And if the libertarian response in this opportunity is to say, hey, I'll drive you off the cliff at 40 miles an hour, that's not much of an opportunity to the American people to say, we're ready to embrace something fundamentally different. And that's why I think making it about localization, saying, let's get government down to the community level where it's transparent, customized, voluntary, everybody gets what they want, everybody wins. Let's give everybody what they want and win.
Thank you very much, Adam. Mark Whitney.
Oh, when I throw my hand up, it's usually me responding to Adam. I'm just kidding. You think you got problems, you people out there listening. How would you like to be Joe Biden? Joe Biden can't sniff women from 6 feet away. It's got to be tough. I just got, about a week ago, I got a black market haircut. I got on Craigslist. I found a woman who would not give me her real first name with a burner phone to come to my studio and give me a haircut because she's afraid of the government. Here in California, Governor Gavin Newsom, who's probably going to get elected president in 2024, he is currently polling at 83%, and that is the governor of a state who has the 7-Elevens open and the beaches are closed. You cannot maintain 6 feet of separation at a 7-Eleven. That's why it's called 7-Eleven, not 6-Eleven. That's all. That's all I got.
All right. So first topic we're going to cover is the COVID-19 and the government response. Okay. In 2020 has been off to a rough start, having to deal with the pandemic, which has crippled the economy and shown that we are vulnerable as a nation to medical emergency. There's a chance that a newly elected Libertarian president may have to deal with this crisis once again in 2021. My question to you, starting off with Mark Whitney, is going to be, what would your approach to be to ensure Americans that there will be adequate testing available for everyone if this happens again?
Whitney, 2020 is the virus you always wanted and never knew you could have. That's all I've got to say here tonight. I would be honest with people, actually, if I was in one of the 51 executive positions in this country as a president or a governor, I would be honest in saying I do not have the authority to close your business. There's no provision under which the Constitution can be suspended. That also is stated in our party's platform. At the same time, I am very persuaded by doctors who are signing their wills and are afraid to go to work. We have people out there who are literally right now choosing between clean oxygen and keeping themselves alive economically. This is a bad time to be a small business. It's a bad time to be a small town. It's a bad time to be a small political party. So what I would do is be honest as to the limits of my authority, and I would use the access that I have to experts to provide guidelines, and the people would have to decide what they think is best. And I think most people would decide to do a lot of what we're doing now, but damn it, the beaches would be open.
So, Adam Kokesh, this question to you.
Well, Kevin, honestly, as someone who knows you and has had several conversations with you, I'm a little disappointed in your question. Maybe you're just playing devil's advocate here, but you know The pandemic didn't do it to us. What did it was the government response and the restrictions on economic freedom and everything that has made it more difficult for us to respond to what is a very real but relatively insignificant health crisis. And just, we already have the fear-mongering numbers put in perspective here. We know that this is not a crisis of health so much as it's a crisis of fear. And that's why I think calling it the coronaphobia crisis is way more appropriate. Your question specifically, though, was about test kits and getting those out. I think we would all, as libertarians, have the same basic answer: is get the government restrictions out of the way. It's just all the more offensive and obvious now when we see it actually directly negatively impacting Americans' health, that government has certain economic policies, not just in the shutdown and the state of emergency and the enforcement of martial law that we're in right now, but in economic restrictions. Doctors not allowed to cross borders to practice, and manufacturers having to wait for FDA approval. All of this nonsense red tape is now very clearly harmful and needs to be done away with. This is our opportunity, I think, as Sam Robb pointed out so well in his introduction.
Okay, and I'm going to kick that question to you, Sam.
Okay, fantastic. Can I say what he said? Because Adam absolutely is correct. One of the big hurdles that we have right now is making sure that these regulations that we've rolled back in order that we can address this issue stay rolled back. Because not only are we going to be dealing with it again, we're going to have a second wave, I'm sure, as these things kind of play out. As you know, I've heard people say that this is going to be just like the seasonal flu now. That goes all the way back to the 1918 flu pandemic, where it's just going to be something we're going to have to learn to live with and deal with. But we need to get the government out of the way, not just for coronavirus, but for whatever the next virus is. Because right now, what we've shown is that anybody with a modest lab and the ability to do some genetic tinkering can bring the world economy to its knees. And someone out there is going to be willing to do that. We need to prepare ourselves by getting the government out of the way, getting people to understand that recommendations, that this is a situation we're going to have to deal with, and we may have to deal with in the future, but we have to deal with it together as individuals and not rely on government to take care of us.
Ken Armstrong, your question?
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, we're all in heated agreement here because we're all libertarians and we all agree that the solution is to get government out of the way. The number one thing that government could have been doing for us from the very beginning is making sure that we had the information that we needed to make the decisions that are best for the American people. The test kits, they didn't have to provide the test kits. They just had to get out of the way so that American manufacturers who would have had an economic incentive from the get-go to provide the kits could have made them available to us. They needed to get out of the way of information and not worry about what it was going to do to the stock market to provide us with the true information about what was going on. And then to use a crisis as the excuse for suspending the Constitution of the United States, when if there was ever an important time to have a constitution, it's when things are going sideways on us. So I think they've done everything wrong so far. And yes, we're libertarians. That's the way we look at things.
Okay, Dan, do you have the
same
answer?
Anything to add after all that?
Yeah, actually, I want to say this because a lot of people are in support of suspending the Constitution because, hey, we all got to stay safe. And so if the government needs the power to lock us in our homes, they should have it. Here's the thing. If you suspend the Constitution, there is no longer a government. The government is created by the Constitution. If you suspend that Constitution, there is no government. If the Constitution is the law of the land, there is no law. We now have an organization of tyrants who have declared war on the American public. That's what we're dealing with. And what I've been suggesting to people when we're living under these rules and people are telling us don't go outside for non-essential activity and they're getting cited for going to church, even though they're observing more than what's safe for precautions as far as staying in their cars or keeping distances away from other people, wearing masks and all these things, they're still being cited. It's important to recognize that this is the time we need to start breaking unjust laws. We need to start engaging in disobedience. We need to get out there and break the law. Go for a jog, wear your mask, observe, do whatever you need to do to stay safe, but break the law. That's what we need to be doing right now.
So adequate testing would be, how would we get the adequate testing, Dan? Just 30 seconds to follow up. Is it
Get the FDA out of the way?
Okay. Okay, second question, same topic. So, Dan, we're going to leave with you on this, okay? What would you do as president to ensure that a large percentage of our critical medicines and medical supplies are not made overseas? Because the problem was that 80% of our testing ability and essential protective clothing was made overseas. How would you prevent that in a crisis like this?
There's a few different things, but these are kind of really big picture. There's a lot of regulations that make it more expensive to manufacture in the United States, the cost of labor and everything else. But we have to consider that this is also a global issue. When you have countries with people who are poor, those people are willing to work for less. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We're giving jobs to people who don't have any money so that they can build up their countries. They can have things like electricity and clean running water that we already have in this country. We're helping to share the wealth, and that's a great thing. If we want to get those manufacturing jobs back over here, actually the solution might be to allow the entire world economy to equalize. And you can do that by getting government out of the way. And sure, jobs are going to leave here, but that's going to be temporary. They're going to come back once everything equalizes. But the more we try to stop that and prevent that by creating all these trade wars to try to keep money in certain places, we're just going to prolong that. We're going to make things more difficult. And we're also going to make things more expensive. Sure, we could get all the tests here in the United States, but then those tests are going to be 5 times more expensive. And we already have a problem where everything is overregulated and people can't afford the medication that they need now. Okay,
so I just want to remind everybody, we're going to try to keep, so we get through all the questioning. So let's try to keep the answers within a minute. Ken Armstrong, same question.
Well, you know, one of the problems is that we have over-regulated the market so much that we've forced the manufacture of these things outside of our country. We need to have information available to the public, but we don't need to be propping up an industry and forcing the cost of that industry through the roof. We do things like we complain about foreign labor coming into the United States, and at the same time we want to prop up the American wage with mandatory minimum wages, and all of those things. The regulations cause the cost of producing things inside the country to go through the roof and unfairly prop up those costs. So I'm with Dan. If we just introduce fair market, free market liberty into the equation, eventually things will settle. They'll reach an equilibrium that's the natural equilibrium where things should be.
Okay. We have Sam Robb.
Okay. The problem really isn't having equipment, medicines, or protective equipment being manufactured overseas. The problem is that we had a single supply chain, and that was in a lot of cases straight through China, direct to China. And when they had issues, we had issues. That's just bad business. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about the government, whether you're talking about a manufacturer. Having one sole source of supply that you rely on means that you have a single point of failure. What we need to do is diversify, is encourage people, and I think we're seeing that right now with people waking up and learning that having a single supply chain is a bad thing. But the other thing that has been mentioned is regulation. Not just regulation in terms of making things more expensive to produce here, because when the crisis hits, we're willing to pay for something expensive if it solves the problem right now. What we saw was people producing protective equipment and then having that sit until an FDA inspector can get around and say, okay, yeah, no, this looks like, yeah, you can use this. You know, it took us 5 days and people died in the meantime, but you know, at least you know that this protective equipment is good for you. We need to get the government out of the way. We need to diversify our supply chains, and we need to let the market handle it, because the market will do it much more efficiently.
Okay, Adam, we touched a little bit before about China, so I'm sure I know your answer already, but go ahead.
Well, I'm glad I don't have to go first, and I can just say, yeah, what they said with all that brilliant economic analysis. The only thing I go coming towards the end of the cycle, I get to just put a flourish on everything and talk about more fun stuff. And really, when you talk about that balance of where things should be produced for efficiency, and that the market would find a better balance that would generally trend towards more localized production because it's more efficient in most cases. Some things are more efficient to outsource, or whatever the case may be. But right now, the distortion is because government borders are used as an excuse for the free flow, to interfere with the free flow of goods and services and individuals. You get government borders less relevant, or ultimately irrelevant. You ask, what should the role of government borders be? Nothing. The only legitimate borders are private property borders, whether it's by community or individuals. That's what counts. And so something way more fun to say. I got the ultimate antivirus in my back pocket now with John McAfee on my team, and he's coming from overseas and hiding right now. So the best antivirus protection that we can get against the virus that is the overgrown federal government is something that we need to import right now. And that's John McAfee.
Mark Whitney. I see you laughing, Mark.
Yeah, it's fantastic. You got to love this party. So, as an entrepreneur for 40 years, I make it a point to have at least 2 suppliers for mission critical items. So there's no way I can get along with one supplier. My youngest son started a business, free trading with China. I'm a big free trade guy. I think the future is not local. I think it's global. I think anyone that wants to make a mask should be able to make a mask, and anyone that wants to be able to buy a mask should be able to buy a mask. What could be simpler than that? So many of these things where there was a chokehold are utilitarian items. There's absolutely zero reason why items like that should have to have a second steering wheel attached to the market the government represents.
All right, so now this is going to be the next topic, national debt and the relief package, and then I'm going to kick in Brian Nichols. He's going to take over with the next topic after that. So national debt relief package, prior to the bailout or relief package, whichever one you want to use, just passed. The national debt was approaching $24 trillion. Okay, if elected, you're likely not going to have any fellow congressional libertarians to help pass any agenda that you wish to pass with resolving the national debt. You're going to have Republicans and Democrats to work with. How will you address the national debt and also convince Congress to reduce the unfunded liabilities, which sits at over $100 trillion? And I'm going to start with Dan.
So I think the most important thing we can do with most of this debt is recognize that a lot of this debt is owed to the Federal Reserve, and a lot of it's owed to other banks. We need to understand that this debt was borrowed in our names with the expectation that we, the citizens who have no part in this debt, are going to repay it. I didn't sign for that money. I didn't spend that money. I didn't receive that money, and I didn't directly receive any benefits from it. And if I had, I probably wouldn't have agreed to it. So we need to recognize that the United States debt is not the American debt, and we should not force American citizens to pay for that. If the United States government is out of money and it cannot pay those debts, then it needs to deal with it the same as any other corporation and start defaulting or negotiating down those debts and say we can't pay it. The great news about this is it's going to absolutely destroy our credit rating, which means Congress no longer gets to decide their own debt ceiling. They are now forced to live with a debt ceiling by all the banks who are lending them the money to spend, and they will absolutely have to balance their budget.
Ken Armstrong.
Well, listen, it's really, I hate to say it's simple because it's not simple, but it's not as complicated as everyone wants it to be. We've got an entity, the United States government, that owes, we'll say, $30 trillion right now, give or take. And that same entity owns the paper that says that they own about $240 trillion in real property. This doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out how you make the books balance. We need to gradually divest the federal government of the real property that it owns, put that back into the private sector, into the hands of the public who should be owning it in the first place, and we need to pay down the debt that we've got.
Okay, next, Sam Robb, same question.
Actually, I take Dan and I put him in charge. I make him the debt czar and let him go to town on everything. Ken also had some great ideas. I'm going to mention Mark Whitney and Adam Kokesh to give everybody a chance to respond now. But seriously, there's some great ideas. There are solutions to this. One is to sell off some assets to raise some money. The other is to stop spending money. Bring troops home from overseas. Stop engaging in endless wars. Stop the war on poverty. Stop the war on drugs. Stop the war on immigration. Allow the country to bring people in who want to grow this country and be Americans and start an economic boom that helps carry us out of this and pay off our debts. It's not, like Ken said, it's not difficult. It might be a lengthy process. It might be something that we have to get a lot of people behind and convince them that it's the way to go. But it's something that we absolutely can do if we really want to. And that involves getting the government out of the way, unleashing the American people, and letting us do what we do best, which is succeed.
Now, I just want to point out, because I might have missed this with Ken, but the second half of the question, how are you going to convince Democrats and Republicans in Congress to make this happen, Sam?
Okay. As a Libertarian president, you actually have the benefit of you being able to work with both sides. You can go to the Democrats and say, hey, you know what? War on drugs. Fantastic. We're against it too. You're against it too. Let's work together. Let's make this happen. You can go to the Republicans and say, hey, you know what? It's time for us to bring the troops home. They've served. They've done their job. They've been dealt dirty. They need to be brought home. Hey, Adam Kokesh, how would you like to lead the VA? Take that and turn it into a private institution and privatize it and get it off the government rolls and get it serving the people that it needs to serve. We have the opportunity to do that.
Okay, so Adam, your question, how would you get the main key, which I think you're going to agree with the other candidates, but how do you get Democrats and Republicans to work with you? But your answer is
answering that. I'm going to end with that. Yeah, you know where we're going with this, but now we got a real debate. Now we got a real debate on our hands because, Ken says he wants to pay down the debt. How can you pay down? Why would you want to pay down an illegitimate debt that's being forced on people? I didn't sign up for this. It's a debt incurred in my name. The whole thing is artificially structured through this paper money system and digital money system to rip you off. The taxes that we pay don't even pay the interest on the debt. It's an engineered system designed to keep us down, to take advantage of us economically. And Sam, I love the collaborative approach here, but you're saying still you want to, why would you sell assets that belong to the federal government that they have taken from the American people and give them to the people who government has created this debt with? You're saying let's steal more, let's empower them to steal more from the American people and give it to those interests. And Dan has a brilliant analysis of this, but then goes on to like kind of get wishy-washy on the policy and uses this collectivist language of our credit rating. Dan, I know you know better than that, but our credit rating, that you're talking about disempowering the government from creating more false contracts and more false debt. My platform of taking the government through a bankruptcy says we are not acknowledging the illegitimate debt at all. We are giving it all the assets of the federal government corporation as we liquidate it back to the American people as directly as possible. And with my plan, which I think is the only one that really addresses this question properly by saying bankruptcy, we need to go through a bankruptcy. We need to discharge this illegitimate debt to pay back the true creditors who are not the foreign banks and foreign governments and corporations and the Federal Reserve who own this debt on paper, but the American people. And if the American people say this is what we're going to do, no asshole in a suit in D.C., Republican or Democrat, is going to stand in our way.
Ken Armstrong, I'm going to give you 20 seconds, and then Sam 20 seconds to go back at him. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, so very simply, either we agree that we have debt or we don't agree that we have debt. There's a thing called the law of agency. The government has acted as our agent. They have accumulated debt. We can acknowledge that debt or not acknowledge it, but the rest of the world considers that we have debt. And if we're going to be honest players with the rest of the world, we need to find a way to settle that debt.
Sam, 20 seconds, go.
There are, in addition, I'd say there are some debts that absolutely are legitimate. There are debts that we owe to people, the American people. There are debts that we need to settle for services that we have contracted with as a government. As Ken said, it's by agency. Whether or not that is legitimate, you can argue that, but we did allow it to happen when we could have stopped it. Therefore, we've given our stamp of approval.
All right, Mark, I want to get your take on this. Mark.
Yeah, so I'll actually use some authority that the people give presidents to declassify some documents. So just for fun, right? In the news right now, Joe Biden is being accused of rape. So the entire time Joe Biden was senator, and to this day, if you are an employee on Capitol Hill and you accuse a senator or congressman of a sexual harassment, you are given a 30-day cooling off period with full pay. If you still persist in your claim, they say to you, well, yeah, you know, like the mobsters they say you could go to court or you could sign this non-disclosure agreement and we would give you a big chunk of money to go away, and that would be taxpayer money that the grab ass is paid off with. So as president, I would declassify all these non-disclosure agreements unless the Republicans and Democrats play ball. All their sex secrets go to the New York Times.
How would you get the Congress, the Democrats, Republicans to work with you?
I just told you. I threatened them by disclosing their sex secrets. What the hell more do you want?
All right, there you go. All right, so now I'm going to kick it over to Brian.
A president can actually, that's an actual answer, you know, as opposed to what Adam gave you.
I want to respond to Adam's comment. You're absolutely right, and I might have misspoken and said our debt is the United States debt or credit rating. But I also want to say a lot of people say we have, you know, the United States government. I keep using we, not we. The United States government says they have a ton of property, millions of acres of property that they can sell, that they can use to pay off this debt. But here's the thing. The government does not have any right that the people created it did not have in the first place. So if they didn't have the right to just circle a map and say, I own 1 million acres of land, then that is not the government's land to sell to pay off this debt. And we have to acknowledge that.
All right. I want to move to the next topic, which is going to be fundraising. Obviously, if you're running a campaign against a Republican and Democratic candidate, there's a lot of money involved. So I'm going to kick over to Brian. I'm going to remove myself. Brian Nichols from the Brian Nichols Show is going to come in right now and take over for the next two topics. All right, Brian.
Gentlemen, good to see you, and thank you for joining us here on this awesome debate. So far, so good. And yes, my question is about fundraising. So obviously running third party has its own set of challenges, and amongst them is getting money in the door for not only the LP, but also for the rest of the candidates out there. So let's start with you, Mr. Whitney. How would you differentiate yourselves from the other candidates out there to help bring in dollars from those weary donors?
Well, I don't need the money. I'm rich and everybody else is broke. I ended the first quarter with $100,000 in the bank, which is probably more than all my opponents have combined. So I can run this thing all the way to November 3rd. I think the reality is that political donations is the first thing to go in a bad economy. It's going to be impossible to raise money. So if you nominate somebody who's broke, that person's going nowhere.
All right, going forward, Mr. Kokesh, how would you try to bring some fundraising dollars into the LP, into the other candidates?
Well, as the fundraising leader in this race, I would say that I would keep doing what I'm doing, which is offering a meaningful alternative to the two-party system in a way that separates what we're offering from what any of these other libertarian candidates are offering, because they're all saying, I'm going to be president and I'm going to maintain the centralized system. I'm saying, let's give the people what they want. Let's have localization. Let's have a meaningful difference from the two-party system. And by bringing in traditional non-voters and libertarian-leaning independents, we're going to be able to have a breakout year, if not a victory, for the Libertarian Party by showing that there is a real alternative, and it's not a different version of what they're offering. It is something fundamentally different.
A fundamental different alternative is definitely what we need. So, Sam Robb, how would you help bring that alternative to the forefront by bringing some fundraising dollars into the LP?
People give to support causes that they enjoy, that they fall behind, that they want to see succeed. You don't see people giving to companies that are foundering. You don't see people investing in businesses that are going down the drain. You see people investing in things that they like, that excite them. And what we have as an opportunity here as the Libertarian Party is to be the adult on stage, We have Mr. Hair Sniffer. We have Orange Man Bad. We have a situation where, for the first time in my life, I've had people say, "You're a libertarian, and you seem like the adult in the room." We have the opportunity to give the American people something to vote for, whether that is a president or non-president. It's something that they can get behind and say, you know what, I'm tired of living in fear. I'm burnt out on this whole idea that I have to vote against this guy or that guy, or everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket, because it already has. Let's give them someone they can vote for, someone they can identify with, and someone that they can get behind and support.
All right, going forward, Mr. Ken Armstrong, how would you help bring some of those necessary fundraising dollars to the forefront for the LP?
Well, first of all, I have to say I think it's absolutely precious that somebody would think $100,000 is enough money to take us through to November. Ain't that cute?
How much do you have, Ken?
But
we'll go back and forth after that.
But I have to
That's
say,
spoken by somebody who's broke.
But I have broke or 100,000.
Let's stay focused on the fundraising question for now, Ken, and we'll give you a second to respond there, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. So broke or $100,000 is the same number going into the general campaign, because it's going to take roughly $22 million to bring any kind of serious media presence to the Libertarian campaign. We're going to do that through some networks of people that we're working with who want to see a serious Libertarian nominee for president. And I think once we've got the nomination, you'll see that we can bring the right people to the table to bring money to the party.
Now, Mark, I'll let you respond in a second, but first, let's final question here for Dan Taxationist Theft Berman. Dan, how would you go ahead and bring some fundraising dollars here to the LP, but also to those necessary candidates in the local elections who need the fundraising so desperately?
Right. I think we're all looking at this question wrong. We don't need some magic candidate to come along every 4 years and say, hey, I've got some magic solution. I've got connections to bring in money. Bernie Sanders did an amazing job getting millions of people to donate $5 a month, and this worked really well. We need to build a system like this where we get people to continue donating throughout the year, throughout the next 4 years. But not only that, when I build this with my campaign, I'm not just going to take this and leave like Gary Johnson, who I don't know what he's doing with his mailing list or his donors, but I want to share this with the other candidates. So as I build a fan base and a following for the campaign that I'm running, I'm sharing this information with other candidates who are running now. I'm introducing them so they also have not just, hey, here's some other candidate that's randomly emailing you. You have an introduction, a personal connection, and this should be intergenerational. We should have these people growing and continuing to donate to these campaigns and to the Libertarian Party. And this is how we succeed. I see very little of this, and that's one of the things I'm fighting to change right now.
Now, Mark, you took exception to $100,000 not being enough to get us through to the November general election. So I'll give you a chance here, 30 seconds to respond to Ken.
Yeah, so we need to be realistic about the market we're dealing in. This is a coronavirus market. The political window, the market window for politics has been closed by 90%. Even Joe Biden can't get publicity. Libertarians are not going to be able to raise much money this year. This is going to be a very, very tough year. And as the guy who's been successful in free markets and has money, maybe that's why I'm the only guy being realistic. Everybody else here is talking nonsense. This is a completely different year and maybe a one-off year. And if you can't be realistic about the market we're in, you can't go out and talk to the American people realistically.
And Adam, don't worry, I didn't forget about you, my man. Adam Kokesh, how would you go ahead and deal with some fundraising here for the LP?
Oh, no, I already answered. I just think as the conversation has turned, it'd be fair for a little response here, in that a lot of these points that have been brought up are all great. One of them, that we are always going to be at a financial disadvantage because elections are advanced auctions of stolen goods, and none of us are going to be stealing much compared to, well, if anything, hopefully, compared to the Republicans and Democrats. So having a candidate who has an existing fan base like myself and John McAfee, and the ability to get national media attention with civil disobedience, with stunt activism, with effective messaging, I think that's absolutely critical for our nominee. And if it's not someone who has that, I want to say this to the other candidates, that I encourage you, and one of the things that I'm going to be doing to support everybody else, whether I'm the nominee or not, is organizing the veterans protest at the debates, shutting down, retake the debates to make sure that they let the libertarian debate. And I would encourage all the other candidates to think, if you're in that situation where as a libertarian, you got a low budget operation, you got to be creative. And while I have, I think the best track record in that, we could all strive to be better.
All right, moving forward. So we do have a question from Facebook, and this was put in and it says, how would you approach, and I'll start here with you, Taxationist Theft Berman, how would you approach ensuring that members of marginalized groups, such as the LGBTQ community, can receive workplace protections in order to avoid discrimination? Let's try to keep this to around 30 seconds if we can.
That's a good question. I think through education and information is probably one of the best things we can do, because we want to understand that when businesses do things that we don't approve of, we want the market to decide. Just like if a company is using slave labor, a lot of people are going to say, hey, we don't want to buy products from this company, and therefore they're going to lose business. It helps them to make sure that they're securing rights for everybody else. And one of the most important things that we have as leverage as employees is that right now, or sorry, we don't have leverage, is we have to work. We have to work. We are begging for these jobs. We're out of work now, and we don't know what the hell we're going to do with ourselves. And that is because the government has pushed us all into debt. When we can say, hey, we don't really need that job because I own my home, and all I need to do is earn a few hours worth of work to pay for food to survive, and that's it. I don't need your job that bad. And if you're going to treat me like crap, I don't need to work for you, and you're not going to have any employees to work for you. That is the biggest point of leverage that we have absolutely lost, and we need to get that back.
Mr. Armstrong, how would you try to help protect those LGBTQ folks in the workplace?
Well, you know, first of all, the biggest mistake we make is by creating classes of people who deserve more care than other people. We started with Plessy v. Ferguson, where white people had more rights than black people, and we've gone down the line trying to figure out how we can give this group more rights than that group, and so forth. What we need to do is we need to say the 14th Amendment says all Americans have equal protection under law. Anybody who is denied a right because of who they are should have the right to challenge that in court, to do whatever they can do to balance the field. But we shouldn't be creating extra classes of people with more rights than anyone else.
Mr. Rob, the same question to you. How would you try to see LGBTQ rights in the workplace enforced?
Okay, LGBTQ rights are human rights. That's really what it comes down to. It doesn't matter who you like, who you love, who you live with, what the color of your skin is, where you're from, what religion you follow. You are a human being, and you deserve to be treated decently as a human being. That said, I think that as a libertarian, it's not the government's job to ensure that everybody is treating you and being nice to you. That's a kindergarten teacher. That's not the government. That's not what we are here to do. We're here to protect life. We're here to protect property. The minimal amount of government is what we want in order to make sure that those are preserved. And what we need to do, as was mentioned by Dan, is make sure that this is something that as a society we address, not by rule of law, but by information, by getting to people and changing hearts and minds. When people get to know the stranger, when people get to know someone different, that's when their attitude starts changing. That's when they start seeing people not as a gay person, not as a black person, but as another human being, someone worthy of love and respect.
Obviously, we're all libertarians here, so we're kind of giving a variation of the same answer. I don't mind. So, Mr. Kokesh, what would be your response there to protecting those LGBT rights in the workplace?
Yeah, a lot of fist pumping for Sam Robb there, and yeah, me too on what he said. I get to add a flourish here now to say that I think that there are two prongs to this problem, and one is of compassion and understanding and attitude, and that's obviously a cultural phenomena, and the other one is in valuation, just that people who are undervalued in the workplace, and to single out, as Ken adequately or appropriately described, that creating special classes of people creates all sorts of problems, especially under government. So if these are your problems, why would you turn to the violent institution of government that is uncompassionate as it gets, that is devaluing, that creates inefficiency and misappropriation of value, and makes it harder for individuals to be properly valued in society, in the market. And the only thing I would have to add here is that how we transition out of this system and this paradigm, where my platform offers a really unique answer that I don't think any other candidate has a way of escaping this entirely by policy, is localization. Get it down to the community level. Let people form community policy based on their own needs, their own values, and you're going to see a natural balance here when you get government completely out of the way with that transition.
And finally, Mr. Whitney, obviously you have experience in the private sector. So what would be your response to helping making sure that those folks in the LGBTQ community feel that they're being protected?
Well, it's actually very much a private sector problem. One of the reasons we're seeing the tyranny we're seeing now in the suspension of the Constitution is that the people like it. And some of the most sophisticated people we have run tech companies. Qualcomm's right across the road from my company here in San Diego. So when you go to work at Qualcomm, they hand you an employment agreement and they make you waive your First Amendment rights to access the courts and sign a binding arbitration agreement. So if the spirit of the First Amendment, if the right of the citizen to seek redress and access the courts, and there are federal remedies that are available to people in the federal courts, but if the highest level people from our best colleges are giving the finger to the First Amendment in their employment agreements, shame on them. And shame on you for signing that agreement. If you see an arbitration agreement and an employment contract, you ought to go across the road and open your own company. Shame on you for signing it.
All right, so that was going to wrap up that Facebook question we had. Now we're going to move forward to discussion on trade. Now, according to President Trump, trade wars are easy to win. Well, that's at least what he said back, a year ago or so ago. But now here we are. We've embraced this protectionist mindset when it comes to trade. And understandably, it's irked a lot of folks who are more free market, libertarians, but also even some conservatives. So in an era of trade wars and pandemics, let's start with you, Dan Taxationist Theft Berman. What would be your message to the American people as it pertains to a libertarian focus on trade policy?
We need absolute fair trade between countries. I mean, we need to understand that when, a country itself, the United States does not produce cars and China does not produce these COVID-19 test kits. Individuals and businesses and which are basically groups of individuals in China are creating these tests. Groups of individuals in the United States are making cars. The country itself does not produce anything. All they're doing when they want to regulate trade is they're saying, if you create a product here and you want to move it to another country so you can make some money, we want a piece of the action. And if we don't like the leaders who are in charge of that country, your business is going to pay for it. We need to stop that. They don't have the authority for that, and we need to stop letting them think that they do.
Mr. Armstrong, what would be your libertarian message as President of the United States on trade?
Well, it's really interesting that Mr. Trump has said he could solve all of our trade problems, and all he's managed to do is make them a more muddled mess and tax Americans through tariffs to try to solve the problems that he created. Again, we're libertarians. We all agree in various shades of the same approach. But honestly, if we would get out of, we granted China most favored nation trading status back in the 70s, and then we have complained that they take advantage of their trading status in the 2000s. What we need to do is open up a global trade so that American business people can do business with who they want to do business with and not give anybody favored status. Just let people do business.
There's definitely a big confusion between fair trade and free trade. So, Sam Robb, as a libertarian, what would you do to help better explain that to the American people and show them the message of what it means to be a libertarian when it comes to trade?
Free trade is you getting to talk to whoever you want, to trade whatever you want, for whatever you want. It is the very basis of our economy. It's the basis of human existence, right? You get money out of the equation, go back 10,000 years, and it's, one guy saying to another guy, hey, you've got a cow, I've got 4 chickens, how about we do a swap, right? That's free trade. That's being able to do whatever you want without anybody getting in the middle. Sometimes it makes sense to have somebody in the middle. Sometimes you want a broker. Sometimes you want to hire someone to do trade for you. That's where you start getting companies put together. That's when you start getting organizations. And what we have in the situation right now in the world, we don't really have free trade. People talk fair trade. They say, hey, we need to make sure that these guys get more, these guys get less. You are a rich country. You should be able to suck it up and spend more. Nonsense. As Dan mentioned way back, and it seems like forever ago in this debate, we should just open things up, let the world economy equalize, bring up the countries that are struggling right now, give them the opportunity to boom economically. It's going to hurt for a little bit, but you know what? We've been through it before. I'm from Pittsburgh. We went through a phase where the steel industry tanked. We're now a robotics powerhouse. We're now a technology powerhouse as a city. It can be rough for individuals, but overall, we're better when we allow freedom to reign.
Amen. So, Mr. Kokesh, you like to talk about letting freedom ring. You wrote a book about it. Got it right here, actually. Freedom. How about that? So, let's talk about freedom as it comes to trade. So, Mr. Kokesh, what would you do as a libertarian to help make sure people understand what it means to be a free trader and embrace those free markets that we hold so near and dear?
Wait, are you saying you have my book with you there in studio? I'm going to have to file a complaint with the Federal Commission on Presidential Debates for moderator bias. This is not fair. But
not only that, it's a signed copy, Adam. I'm moving, so all the books are out on the table.
I'll bet we all have copies of it right here.
Yes, because we give them away. Now, I would generally agree with all of the sentiment of the three candidates that have just gone before me here. I would just actually answer the question. Yes, thank you, Sam. I would just generally answer the question a little bit differently to say that I am 100% committed to my principles and my platform, and 100% committed to my standard of ethics that is at the foundation of libertarianism. But in terms of messaging, my pride of authorship is really irrelevant here. To answer the question, I would do whatever tests best. And I think what tests best from my experience right now is localization. Everybody gets what they want when government is localized to the community level, and it's transparent, accountable, and customized. And you as an individual have the right to trade with anyone on earth, and no government has a right to interfere with that right. But however we focus group it, I think the working together as a team to select from these various messaging approaches, which is the best. Yeah, I would use the messaging that's resonating most effectively, and it might have something more to do with coronaphobia and the crisis we're in now than traditional libertarian perspective even.
So after that accidental freedom book promotion, we're going to go to Mark Whitney, the businessman who you're dealing with us every single day, being a businessman, looking at trade. So let's kind of take not only your libertarian perspective, but also that as a businessman. How would you be able to best take the libertarian argument for free trade and hopefully change some people's hearts and minds to see our argument in the positive way?
Well, right now, individuals and virtual organizations all over the world are rethinking the term currency of exchange. What does it mean to have currency of exchange? Blockchain networks and digital money are going to redefine the term currency of exchange, and the future is not local. The future, therefore, is global. And, when I think of localization, I think of Jackie Gleason playing Buford T. Justice in Smokey and the Bandit. I think of the local sheriff in my little Vermont town. If you didn't stop for the sign, he'd pull you over and start beating you with the flashlight and say, you want to have me stop, or you want to slow down? That's what I think of when I hear localization. The future is global. Bitcoin is going to give us the ability to trade freely without having to pay a Shylock third party on a global basis. That's happening now. I hope it continues to be open source, and people like Mark Zuckerberg don't become the purveyors of these things and ruin the whole idea.
All right, gentlemen. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Kevin until part 2 of my questions come up. So with that, Kevin Warhamel, you're up, sir.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Now, this is the part that is going to be questions that are individual, kind of what you guys been running on. So you got to answer up for some things that you may be familiar with. I'm going to start with Mark Whitney. Okay, we're going to talk about criminal justice reform. Okay, criminal justice reform has recently changed in New York State. In regards to bail reform, less people have been incarcerated while awaiting trial. But with these changes, people who have been accused of violent crimes are reoffending while awaiting trial. How do you influence bail reform and criminal justice reform while keeping public safety an issue?
Well, bail reform is super simple with GPS technology. There's no reason to have this prehistoric way of keeping people in cages that goes back, 1,000 years ago. A more fundamental issue of criminal justice is that I believe all citizens should have the right to vote, including felons, including people who are in prison. The high office of citizen, that title follows you right into the cage. Prisoners are able to have access to the courts, which is guaranteed by the First Amendment. They're able to participate in society by writing letters to the editor and writing books. I don't know how it became normal for that we say people who are prisoners but are also citizens should not be allowed to engage civically by voting. So that's something I'd like to see added to the Libertarian Party platform. A 28th Amendment, actually, the right to vote shall not be infringed.
Okay. Adam Kokesh, you have run a campaign that, if you were elected, and you've mentioned it already, that you would see the peaceful disassembly of the president, the position of the president, the federal government, and give more power to the states and localization. Is this achievable, and how would this be done?
Well, the question really is, will the federal government last forever? And not only do I hope not, but I'm very confident that it's not, and it is not sustainable in its current form. So the question really to the American people is, you want to do this the easy way or the hard way? The hard way is keep your head buried in the sand and hope that government spares you in its violent death throes as it desperately clings to power. The easy way is, let's apply a solution as big as the problem. Let's not go off that cliff at all and say instead, look, we're going to do something fundamentally different here. And in terms of the bankruptcy process, this is something that I could take hours to explain. I love the policy. We could do more interviews, and I do, a couple interviews every day now, getting into all the details, but it's not complicated. The principles are really simple. Every agency of the federal government, if it's totally useless, like the IRS, it gets liquidated. If it's appropriate as a function, but better localized, like the Department of Transportation, you localize it, cut it up into 50 plus pieces, and every state Department of Transportation takes those functions over. It could be some combination of those, or it could be spun off as a private institution, like I want to see with the VA. I want every single American veteran to get one ownership in the voting share in the VA. So the Veterans Affairs Department is owned by veterans, not by the government. You get the bureaucrats, politicians, special interests, pharmaceuticals out of the way, and the drug war. I guarantee you won't have 22 veterans committing suicide a day when we're able to direct those resources. So there's so much to the mechanics of it. Thank you, Rob, Sam Rob, for pointing out, for highlighting that one. And Kevin, really, with localization, every rock you turn over in terms of what does it do for this policy? What does it do for this? You're like, wow, it's amazing for that. It solves almost all of these problems that we associate with big centralized government.
And when you said IRS, Dan lit up, by the way. When you mentioned he got really,
just
real happy.
one
really
popular
excited.
example. Just one popular example of a federal agency we don't need at all.
Wait a minute. Is that Dan's issue, taxes?
So, Ken, this question's for you. You have had a life of service. You've served in government, you served in the military, and you've been elected to local office. How has this qualified you to be president, and why?
Well, I think we see in the current president a lack of understanding of how government works at any level, and a lack of appreciation for the Constitution. I took my first oath to protect and defend the Constitution in 1977, and I took that oath very seriously. And I found out what the Constitution meant. I've been elected to county office. I've cared about how government operates at the county level, at the local level. I've been in appointed office in Washington, D.C., and I've worked with the diplomatic corps overseas. And seeing how government works at all those levels is a critical piece to being able to make the government function in a constitutional way that serves the people according to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and nothing more than that.
Okay. Sam, this question's for you. Americans are drifting from their faith, but faith still plays an important role when campaigning in politics.
Mhm.
If you are the nominee for the Libertarian Party, how will you win the Christian support that Trump, for some odd reason, holds on to?
One of the things that I think people have a fundamental misunderstanding about is exactly how the Christian faith and libertarianism can interact. And I think that comes from a lot from people thinking that libertarianism means libertine, and it absolutely doesn't. If you go back to the book of Romans, you read what it says, what God's word says government should be. It is an institution created by God to protect us from evildoers, from those who would do us harm. It is there to keep us safe from theft, to keep us safe from violence, and to preserve our liberties. That is the libertarian message. That is the libertarian philosophy and libertarian ideal. What we need to do, and what I want to do as a Christian, whether or not I'm the candidate, but over the next decade, I want to spend time reaching out to Christians and letting them know, hey, there is a party that cares more about you and more about people than the Republicans or the Democrats that you've been supporting.
Good answer. Dan Berman, taxation. No monopoly.
Whatever level of government you're talking about there, Adam.
So, Dan,
you can localize them, man.
You wear your middle name on your hat. I mean, you go everywhere. Taxation is theft. How do you eliminate taxation when the dependency on government is so high?
Well, the first thing we have to do is get everybody to recognize, first of all, that most of the money we spend on taxes are absolutely useless or wasted. A lot of the services that government provides for us are absolutely useless. And once people start to recognize this, they can see how we can start cutting back on a lot of government. Now, of course, government has other revenue streams, voluntary revenue streams. It has courts that charge fees for their use. It has so many different revenue streams. If it wants to create a new bridge or a tunnel or a train or something, they've sold bonds in the past and they've repaid those bonds with fees that they raised from using that, which is the same way private corporations would do the same. So if we get rid of the dependency on tax, we actually are able to see that there's a voluntary interaction we can have, but also we'll be able to see that just like we're getting rid of the monopolies for services, we can find corporations that are willing to do the exact same things, and we'll actually get a much better deal if we take our money elsewhere. So it's actually very possible, and most of the plans, once you limit the size of government, it's very possible to do.
Okay, thank you, Dan. We're going to go to Facebook now for a question that was put into the Facebook thread. How would you work on making the LP more diverse and making more women, people of color, etc., feel that they have a place within the party? I think that's a great question. We'll start with Mark. Let's start with that one.
Well, I grew up in the whitest state in the country, Vermont, and it wasn't until 30 years ago that I was relegated to one of our nation's federal prisons that I had an experience to live among people who were more religiously diverse and more people from all over the world, but primarily brown and black people. And growing up in New England as I did, I was told that we were the good ones, that we people in New England, we were the good ones. We didn't believe in slavery. We didn't believe in indentured servitude. And it wasn't until those times where I started studying the Bill of Rights and the Constitution with my fellow prisoners, most of whom were black and brown skin from all of the world, that I realized our 13th Amendment actually sanctions slavery and indentured servitude for people who have been, quote unquote, duly convicted. So that was a big eye-opening experience for me. And I have been talking about the Bill of Rights ever since, how the Bill of Rights doesn't see black and brown citizens or white citizens. It sees only citizens. And that is one of the key reasons I'm running for president, is to make that real in this country. The Democrats and Republicans certainly have no interest in that.
Okay, I'm going to go to Adam Kokesh. Same question.
Well, it is worth acknowledging that we are a nerdy white male INTJ-dominated movement of nerds spamming for Ron Paul from our parents' basement. So I think the question is deserved and well taken here. And what we need to do is really make sure that we change how we present this message, because this is a message that a lot of us have come to based on, we got to figure this out. We got to address this injustice. I want to do something about this. And we go into this intellectual rabbit hole, and we go down the political road and the philosophical and economic studies and all that. And just connecting with people based on the nature of this message that is founded in love and compassion. And what's motivated all of us to become libertarians isn't that we just want to be right about everything. Why do we want to be right about this? Because we want to make the world a better place for everyone. And so having a message of localization, the everybody gets what they want strategy, to quote my friend Larry Sharp, he says a libertarian is someone who believes you can be as you can be as liberal or conservative as you want, as long as you don't force it on anyone. Localization gets us to that state, manifests in a reality where we really are including everyone and saying, you have the right to create a community based on your values set up to meet your needs.
Okay, I'm going to skip over here and go to Dan. I'm going to jump around a little bit. Dan, you're up. How would you include more people of color, women?
Right. So I think the most important thing is to point out how this is going to benefit everybody. And this does benefit everybody. Libertarianism is great for everybody. I have several women working on my team. In fact, I think more than 50%. Empowering women just to know that and understand that they have a lot of power in the workplace, in whatever field that they're in activism is super important, because once we understand we have power, we're capable of doing so much with it. Another thing I want to point out about African Americans, because I grew up with a lot of them and I went to a lot of the same places and we did a lot of the same things together. And one of the things that I recognized is when I was willing to stand up against authority, they were not. And I know why, because I've been I spent a lot of time in South Central LA, and I know how the police act there versus how they act in different places. And there's a lot of fear in that. There's a lot of fear in standing up. And I've seen this from libertarians too, because libertarians, a lot of them want to be activists and they'll go out and they'll hold up signs. But even recently, when I say we need to break the law and walk outside, even if we're doing it safe and we're keeping our distance from everybody else, there are a lot of libertarians who refuse to leave their homes because they're afraid and they don't want to break the law just to prove a point. So we need to start doing that and setting that example. And that's going to bring people of every color and every gender into this party.
Ken Armstrong, how do we make this party more diverse?
So we asked the panel of white guys how to make the party more diverse, right?
Hey, I'm Jewish, at least half. That's
okay,
not fair.
All right. Well,
and I'm a felon, so I'm an oppressed minority.
There you go.
The worst, way worse than African Americans. Way worse.
So hey, listen. Even though we all believe in anarchy and minimum of government and all that, I do believe in leadership. I believe in personal leadership. I believe that we stand for things as leaders. And one of the things, whether we're elected president or just in our own mind in our community, we're leaders. We can break through the bubbles of our own comfort zone. And I've done this for my whole life. I grew up in a community that by the time I left it was majority black. And I've lived in a state where whites are not the majority, the only state in the country where whites are not the majority. And I've learned in my lifetime, I lived in Italy and in Mexico, and I've learned to go places where I was outside of my comfort zone. And what I discovered through that was I'm more comfortable outside my comfort zone, to tell you the truth. And we as leaders, we need to help people discover that that's real.
Sam, finish this up. How do we make this party more diverse?
Oh, obviously by bringing in more people that don't look like all these white guys here, these old white guys. No, it's reaching out. It's talking to people. It's people, and you hate to say it, right? But it's people like Larry Sharp. When someone sees a black man who's saying, "Hey, libertarianism is the way to go," it's someone like Maj Touré. Hey, you know what? Arming yourself is a good thing. It's an American thing to do. They see someone outside of the mold that society has crafted for them, and they understand that they have the opportunity to step out. When you talk to Christians, you say, "Hey, you know what? You don't have to be a Republican. You don't have to be a Democrat. there's something else out there that you can reach for. When you go to people and you get to know them and they get to know you, something really magical happens there, and that you can start talking and you can start exchanging ideas and you can grow closer. And that's how we need to reach people. That's how we need to bring them into the party, by reaching them where they're at and showing them the path in.
And I think we could all agree, everybody agrees that the inner city could use more freedom more than a lot of other people. They are neglected constantly, and that includes that question. So now I'm going to kick it over back to Brian Nichols. He's got to take up a question on education. I'm going to kick over to education. We're just going to try to keep the answers down to a minute. Let's so we can make sure we finish in time with the last couple sessions here. Okay. So without ado, back to Brian Nichols.
Answer the question so well the first time, I really have to ask it again. So, with schools, and let's start off here with Mr. Mark Whitney. Let's start with you, sir. Schools across the country have closed in response to COVID-19 pandemic, with millions of students now finding themselves learning that they can study at home. So many homeschooling, unschooling, and proponents of alternative forms of education have taken this moment as an opportunity to promote a vision to move away from government schools to market-based alternatives. So, starting with you, Mr. Whitney, what would be your argument to those parents out there who are skeptical at the idea of moving their kids away from the legacy public schooling system?
Well, if you're skeptical, you don't have to do it. As a libertarian, I'm pro-choice on everything. I think if the federal Department of Education was eliminated, it would be easier to introduce competition into education. Education is the word in the dictionary which should be construed the most liberally of all. I have an autistic son. He homeschooled for several years, and it was really onerous complying with the state regulations together with what he actually needed. I think parents should get to choose. I think that if we were down to 50 state Department of Educations, it would be easier for people to lobby their state legislature, introduce competition, and eventually that would catch on. There are going to be a lot of positive changes like this that are come along post-virus in both the public and private sector, where people find out there are cheaper, better, more flexible ways to do things.
Adam Kokesh heard something that piqued his interest, and I think it was more about localization. So
I always trigger Adam.
Adam,
We all do.
Adam, what would be your response there to not only maybe localizing some of these alternatives for education, but maybe convincing the parents that, hey, the alternatives besides the public schooling, they're not so bad?
Well, I just love how I'm collecting endorsements here of localization, even if issue by issue. So I'll take what I can get from my fellow candidates here. But no, this idea really does address everything, and education, as has been pointed out, is one of the issues that localization does a great job of dealing with. And of course, it comes down to choice, consent. You don't have to be forced to pay for someone else's education. You don't have to be forced into any system of education. The resources for education should be allocated voluntarily. They should be done first at the state rather than the federal level, then at the county rather than the state level, and then eventually at the community rather than the county level. You get it down to the community level, everybody gets what they want. And that goes beyond just, what I want or what any of these other candidates want and our ideals for homeschooling or free market education. But people who want to collectivize educational resources get to do it more freely on a voluntary basis with a localized system.
But Sam, Rob, I hear the parents, and they'll say, but the education, it's either not as good or it's leaving kids behind. Help quell some of those fears for us.
Well, first off, lies. Absolutely lies. Because what you are going to find is, in the absence of state education, that education is going to get better. It was fantastic. We used to have students that came out of 8th grade speaking Greek. Okay. We have students coming out of 8th grade that can't even add. We have had such a decline, and it corresponds with the institutionalization of education. The Department of Education, the expansion of government involvement in education has ruined our educational system. It's what is causing the problems. As people have said before, what does government do? It breaks your legs, gives you a crutch, and then says, hey, look how great we were for helping you. That's exactly what happened here. And it happened because people believe that lie. Hey, look at what they have. They have that because they've taken it from you. When the answer is no, what you need to do is get together with people and do the same thing that they've done. If they've got a great education, you look at what they used to do out in the West, right? The community would get together, they'd pool their funds, and they'd hire a teacher to come from out east to come out west. They'd say, hey, we're going to provide you with a farm plot. We're going to provide you with a house. We're going to give you a salary. Come and teach. And the community brought everything together and made sure that their kids were educated. We can do that again. We absolutely have to do that again if we're going to succeed.
So moving forward to Mr. Ken Armstrong. So big difference between schooling and education. And I think a lot of people in the public school camp, they confuse the two. So let's kind of help dispel some of the myths for them so they can see the value in what we're promoting.
Wow, exactly right. The difference between schooling and education. Schooling is what we do with fish. We make them swim together, and that's what we're doing with our kids. Is we're making them all swim together, no matter what they look like, no matter what their strengths or their weaknesses are. And we're finding that as the dollar cost of educating our kids goes up, the return on those dollars keeps going down and down. And making children fit into a one-size-fits-all mold. We've gotten rid of largely industrial arts programs in schools. We've gotten rid of the arts and humanities programs in school. Now we don't teach civics the way we used to, so they're not even sure why we're having a debate right now, because aren't we supposed to just elect Trump or Biden and be happy with it? We need to get away from this idea that we have to make all of our kids swim in a single school and look like each other. If kids want to go through apprenticeship programs, if they want to learn in religious training or secular training or however they want to learn, that should be up to them and their families. No K-12 model, none of that nonsense of schooling them with the bullies and that kind of thing.
Dan, taxation is theft. Berman, obviously your name alone says, I think, what your perspective towards funding for public schools go towards. But I mean, let's kind of help those parents feel a little bit better about the model that we're promoting there. So what's the libertarian argument? Hey, there are alternatives to the government schooling that we have right now.
Well, it's really interesting. I think to quote Bender Bending Rodriguez, the world must learn of our peaceful ways by force. And it's funny that actually kind of happened, because the government said by force, we are shutting down all the schools and you have to learn at home. All of the objections that I've heard to homeschooling in the past have been things like, I don't have time, I don't have money, I don't know how to do it, and all these other things. And now we're finding out, hey, it's really not that difficult. It's not that expensive. But of course, we're still paying for all the schools that we're not even using right now. Is the government giving us a break on taxes while we're going to school? No, they still want that money, even though we're not getting the fruit of that. But what's really interesting is, like I've been saying about how the government taxes us into poverty, we have to work. There are 2 adults in every house working 40 hours a week or more. And most of that money, more than half of that money, goes to taxes. Get rid of that. You should have 1 adult working, and you should have much less overhead, which means that adult can even work less. We are working too hard to feed this system because they have forced us into a system of debt. And when you get rid of that, we will have so much more spare time for the luxury of educating our own children the way that we want to and bonding with them, instead of sending them to a government camp that's going to have some stranger bond with them when we don't get to.
Look at that. We just got consensus on a libertarian debate. I saw a round of applause all across the board. Well, gentlemen, thank you for answering. Thank you for answering such a very difficult question, because obviously schooling and kids are always a topic of conversation that nobody really wants to get too deep into. But with that being said, that was the last of my questions. So turning it over back to Kevin Wormhall. Thanks, gents.
All right, I'm back. Thank you very much, Brian. Brian's doing an excellent job. He's
I want to hear Brian do a voiceover on a golf match. He's getting ready to putt. I just think that'd be fantastic.
So we have an email question that came in before the show from Rich Castaldo of Staten Island, New York. He wants to know, it's an education question, just 30 seconds if you can. What immediate changes would you make to the education system to better prepare students for the economy of the future? Obviously, technology has a lot to play in that, and we'll start with Dan.
I'd say go to a trade school. We're educating people to work in just mindless camps of production lines. That's what the school system was designed for. I consider myself a high school dropout. Of course, I did graduate, but I stopped paying attention around 11th or 12th grade, and I self-taught myself. Now, I know I'm not a normal person, and not everybody's going to do that, but I think everybody, I've met so many interesting people that have learned to be welders, and they're making something like $80,000 a year. We need to stop focusing on this idea that if you get a high school education, you're going to get this much. If you get college, you're going to get this much, a master's degree, this much. We need to stop looking at it like that. Those aren't our only options.
Sam.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had a little bit of mic question there. Would you please repeat the question?
Sure. Well, let me get back to the question. What immediate changes would you make to our education system to better prepare students for the economy of the future? Obviously, technology
right.
to play.
Very first thing, get rid of the Department of Education. They're in the way. Just like with any other big government program, they're serving not the students, they're serving their constituency, which is the teachers' unions. Basically, we're seeing right now preparing students for the future. They're learning about what it means to work remotely. They're learning about what it means to work with people across the country, across the world in some cases. They're being exposed to different cultures. You know, my girls are involved in their school right now. They're doing a virtual scavenger hunt across the globe, and they're watching videos, and they're looking at maps, and they're doing Google Earth stuff. This is the future. This is where we're at, where you can educate yourself with a little bit of guidance, and the government doesn't have to be involved at all.
Adam Kokish, same question.
Yeah, what they said. I would just add that one of the things that is unique about the perspective that I bring to the conversation around libertarianism is a full incorporation of the technological reality that we find ourselves in today, and a historical perspective on the intersection with that and institutionalized violence in the name of government. And there are two really important things that I referenced that I think most people leave out of this conversation. One is that the achievement of a voluntary society, barring meteor hitting the earth, something like that, is inevitable because of the work of Steven Pinker. What he has shown that violence follows a trajectory of decline over the course of human history, that it's our natural progress to get more compassionate, more connected, and more effective in voluntary free trade relationships and get out of coercive relationships like government. And the other is that technology is increasing exponentially in such a way that we see a radical shift in the human experience, where an hour of human labor is producing more goods and services and quality of life than ever before in human history. And that's exponential. That's just going to keep going up and up and up. So incorporating that into the reality of saying, look, we need to get government out of the way before this gets technology. Really, none of it scares me. It scares me that it could happen in a world where government can take it over and use it against people.
Adam went from the same thing they said to taking 30 minutes. No. Mark, 30 seconds.
Yeah, so financial literacy. Financial literacy is the key to being successful in all endeavors. It's not about whether you work by the hour, you work by the project. It's how you manage the money you have. I was raised by a father who thought if he had checks, he had money. And, his nickname was Rubber Hands, and eventually you have to move. That was my financial training as a kid. I taught my kids to stay away from banks, stay away from credit. Don't spend a dollar you don't have. When you start your business, bootstrap it. Financial literacy is really lacking in our American society. Our entire system, both in the private and public sector, depends on people buying shit they don't need with money they don't have. And that's just no way to run a railroad.
Ken, 30 seconds, please.
Well, one of the things I think we can do is eliminate a false standard. You know, I'm a guy who's always done very, very well on tests, high IQ, high SATs, all that kind of stuff. And I can brag about that because that's bought me position in our society. But my son, who's at least as smart as I am, has not always done well on tests. And I think by eliminating too much of a standard, too much of a school, if you will, that people have to swim in, we can create the opportunity for people to really prove their own self-worth without matching our value system.
So we're going to go to our last question of the debate before closing statements. This is a question that I wanted to put in because I feel that we, as libertarians, lack discussing this issue, the issue of the environment. I think it's an important issue. Obviously, carbon emissions and climate change is a key issue, which is important to many voters. Many voters discuss it. First, yes or no answer, is climate change real? And then how can we move towards clean energy without interference of government in the form of subsidies and regulations? And we'll start with Ken. You take lead.
Climate change has been real since the beginning of time, and we can solve that problem by giving opportunities to people to find the solutions that make them their best way to create income and create a better environment around them.
Okay, Mark Whitney.
A lot of people say you can't close everything down to save the planet, and the coronavirus is like hold my beer, right? I think that Gen 4 nuclear is a big deal. I happen to live in San Diego, where a couple of months ago they recorded the warmest ocean temperature in history, or at least since they've been recording. And I come from New England, where if you want to have a ski area now, you have to have snowmaking equipment. When I was a little kid, 8 years old, you step out the door, you disappear in the snow. They have to come dig you out. So I think things have changed. I think it's real. And I think that obviously it's going to be the private sector is going crazy on creating solutions to help promote a better environment right now. And people big and small, there are going to be enormous industries created from it. And even if they stumble into these enormous industries, mistakenly thinking that the environment is changing, that's okay. Everybody gets rich in the process.
Adam Kokesh. Is climate
change is absolutely a real and natural phenomena that, to whatever extent we know is happening today, affected by, is it man-made climate change or not? It really doesn't matter. I think what we know as libertarians is that no matter how bad the crisis is, it doesn't justify violating basic ethics. And, Mark said it, and I would echo the sentiment that the private sector is going to deal with these things better. But in a broader sense, in a way that, we can show people that we care about the environment, is that we want these things valued properly. We want natural resources valued properly. And we're never going to get a better system of managing natural resources with violence and coercion. So whatever solution we want to see for global problems, we have to get people to buy into voluntarily so that it's cooperative. When it comes to managing natural resources and minimizing pollution, again, localizing control to the people who are closest to those resources gets you better policy every time.
Sam Robb.
I have a vivid memory of back when I was a child. We just moved into our new house. I was down in the basement in my dad's workbench reading a Popular Mechanics magazine article telling me about the coming ice age, and how experts were positive that we were headed for global cooling, and it was going to destroy our economies, and we needed to act right now. And thankfully we did. But now they're saying that we're headed for a global warming. It's going to be a new period. We're going to have sea level rise, and we need to act right now. And it's always about giving the government more power. This has nothing to do with the environment. It has to do with control. Whether you're talking about man-made effects on the climate, or whether you're talking about natural climate change, it's an in for people to try and gain control. The market gives a much better solution, because instead of having everybody running in the wrong direction, which we would have been back in the 70s, which we would be now, which Corona has shown us is absolutely, where you're going to end up if you let the government in charge, we can have a distributed model where people are taking care of it and addressing it in a way that makes sense.
So Sam, no? Or you don't believe, or
Yes, we have an effect on the climate. No, I don't believe that it outstrips that big ball of burning hydrogen in the sky.
Okay, Dan, wrap us up here.
So I think the question of whether or not climate change is real, if you're a scientist, you just have to look back and see the ice age to understand that it is real. And if you're not a scientist, ask Noah and he'll tell you it's real. Look, here's the thing. Do we want to live in a cleaner place? What is the environment? It's also the air that we breathe, right? Cleaner air is good for everybody. Why don't we want to just make it cleaner? That's a great thing to work towards. And of course, the government is standing in our way. The government, since the concept of turning homes into solar has been a thing, the government has stood in our way by subsidizing oil and gas. They've prevented us from switching to newer, cleaner nuclear energy. And there's so many different things that the government has done to prevent us from moving forward. They've even in some places made it illegal to take your home off of the grid and disconnect from the power company and go completely solar. We need to get rid of all these policies that prevent people from moving forward. And another thing is that, as we've seen in this crisis, that a lot of people are working at home. There's a lot less traffic and a lot less pollution. And whatever degree that contributes to the environment, that is making our air cleaner. It's great for everybody. And what we've realized from this, even though a lot of people do want to get back to work, is a lot of jobs can be worked from home, which reduces traffic. And if we start shifting into this direction, which is the direction of the future, we're going to see a lot more of that.
Well, first off, I want to thank everybody who did show up tonight to this debate. I sent a mass invite. You five have agreed, and I want to thank you so much for coming here and answering these questions. I also want to thank Brian Nichols of the Brian Nichols Show, who was popping in and out here. And I highly, if you have not been on his show, you better hook up with him. Brian, email him, get on his show. He's got a great podcast with a great audience and a national recognition. So reach out to Brian for sure. And Jake Gutowitz, who is the man behind the private chats. Thank you, Jake, for agreeing to help us out tonight and thread the Facebook feed for questions and also keep us. We did not listen to him with time, but we tried. You know, we did the best we could on a tech environment. So I want to do closing statements. Each candidate gets 2. And we're going to start with Mark Whitney with your closing statement. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Kevin. As you mentioned, a lot of candidates not here today, and we have new people entering this race even as of this week. I think this thing is totally up for grabs, this nomination this year. Ohio took, I think, 9 ballots to decide a winner. It's interesting to me. I was most active in this party from the years 95 to 2005. And today, the Libertarian Party is half the number of members that dues-paying members that it had back in those days. That doesn't make sense to me. We've had social media during this time, and the dues-paying members have been cut in half during that time. So I think there's a messaging disconnect. I think there are too many people with big mouths talking nonsense, and they get a lot of attention. Back when I was active in the party from 95 to 2005, if you were the guy like I am who's mastered the Bill of Rights, you went right to the top. I've had to spend about a third of my time in this campaign defending that the Bill of Rights should stay on the books, defending the Second Amendment, defending the First Amendment. It's been a really interesting experience. I don't know how long it's going to take to double the membership. But, you know, when you're running for president and you say things like destroy the United States, I don't think that's good messaging. I think it sets the party back. I think it makes it harder to put a case forward to the mainstream media that this party should be perceived as a threat and not a joke. So if I'm not the nominee this year, I hope to be the beginning of the doubling of this party so that we have more and better candidates to choose from who are serious about running for office and not just technically running for office. And my site is markwhitney.com. And I'm looking forward to the rest of this campaign, whatever it is. And we'll see where it lands. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark. Adam, you're up. 2 minutes closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. This has been an awesome conversation. 2020 is an important opportunity for the Libertarian Party. I'm not going to blow smoke and tell you, like everybody else, this is the most important election of our lifetimes. But this might just be the black swan that we have been waiting for. I'm talking, of course, about coronaphobia, revealing the similarity of the two old parties, that we have a contest between pussy grabber and kid sniffer. And if we put up someone who's going to give just the other lighter, different version of that messaging, we're going to lose. If we put up someone who's saying, look, we're libertarians, we are fundamentally different, we are offering something in policy that is fundamentally different, we can give the American people what they want and win. We can have a breakout year for the Libertarian Party. We can grow membership. We can get this message with the flag planted firmly in the middle of the Overton window in the national conversation and say, everybody has to have an opinion on this. Should we be more free? Should we be more dependent on government? I think when we get the question out there effectively, the answer is going to be obvious. And us libertarians, as the adults in the room who can be cool, calm, and collected in the face of a crisis and adversity, we're going to find ourselves in charge and bringing freedom to America. That's what we should be about, nothing less than a world set free in our lifetimes.
Okay, we have Sam Robb.
Okay. Sam Robb, samrob2020.com. You can check me out, see about my policies there. One of the things that I emphasize is that institutional change is scary. We are seeing that actually now with the coronavirus. There's a reason that people are clinging to the idea of government saving them. There's a reason that people are clinging to the idea that that they need to do something or somebody needs to do something. It's because they're afraid. It's what's driven the election process for basically my entire lifetime. You need to vote against this guy or this other guy will get in, or vice versa. It's always been about fear. It's always been about driving people based on their emotions. And the Libertarian Party is different because we've got people who have recognized that and stepped outside the box and understand that. But we can't expect people who are still in that box to have the same thoughts that we do, because they're still trapped. They're in the cave. We need to get them and bring them out. We need a search and rescue operation designed to go and reach people where they're at and show them that liberty is the solution to their problem, not more government. They're starting to realize that. They're seeing that now. This pandemic is horrible, yes, but it's also bringing people to the tipping point where they're wondering just what the hell is going on? Why am I allowing the government to do this to me? Why am I allowing the government to tell me that I can't earn money? I can't support my family. I can't keep my house. This is the opportunity that we have to break people out of their old way of thinking and introduce them to something new. But we have to give them something they can believe in. And we have to show them with careful, considered, moderate steps and proposals that liberty is the solution to their problems, so that they will back us when we say, this worked, didn't it? Now, let's take it to the next level.
Sam, that search and rescue goes back to your Navy days, okay? I see, we have Ken Armstrong. Bring us home. And then
yeah, Ken Armstrong, armstrong2020.com. And you know, it's no big secret that of the five guys here, I was the least known in the party a year ago. Came up from Mexico and kicked off our campaign in May of 2019. And it's also very, very true that I've managed to do this on less money than just about anybody else running, which begs the question, why? How could Ken Armstrong end up in the top tier of candidates, finish second in California on Super Tuesday, and not spend so much money? How does that happen? And the answer is, if you want to take your car to a mechanic, you don't look up a guy who's read a book or written a book about car repair. If you want to get your brains operated on, you don't go to a brain surgeon who read a book once about brain surgery and has theories about brain surgery. When you want something important done, you want to take it to people who have experience. I have experience at all levels of government, state, local, federal. I have international diplomacy experience. I have experience in NATO and military organizations. I understand not just how the government works, but where the flaws are in our government and what needs to be desperately fixed. And when I talk to people, when I talk to waitresses in the restaurants that I go to, when I talk to delegates at the conventions that I've attended, when I talk to just the average person on the street, when I talk to them about how my experience matches up with what they need in their leadership and government, people get that. And that experience is what has brought me to a place now where people are looking at me as a serious candidate in the Libertarian Party. So come to armstrong2020.com, find out more about me, find out how you can support our campaign financially and through your volunteer efforts, and how you can make those dollars go even further to take us all the way on November 3rd.
Okay, we're going to finish with Dan, and I want to just let everybody know Dan did finish first in the polls prior to the debate, and there will be another poll up on the Exchange Podcast Facebook page, and I'll share it to all the other group pages to see who you think the best candidate tonight was in this debate. So Dan, finish this up and bring us home.
Sure. So I want to ask this question, and I want people to really think about this. Why do people vote for a president? Now, a lot of people, if you ask somebody, why are you voting for a president? They'll sit there and think about it for a minute, and they'll probably say something, well, somebody's got to run the country. Somebody's got to do all these things. But it's not the government's job to do things like provide schools, provide healthcare, and all these other things. But people want those. They want government to create this. They want someone to run the country, but they want all these other things. So why are people really voting? And they won't tell you this because they don't even understand it themselves. Since the beginning of time, people have looked for other people to solve their problems, especially problems that they had nothing to know, they didn't know anything about. If there's no rain, how do we get rain? Let's talk to the guy who's going to talk to the rain god and make it rain. These are things that people do because we're looking for somebody to solve problems who are bigger than us. That's not the government's job. That's not the president's job. But that's what people are voting for. And we really have to understand that. Because society does need leaders. We do need scientists who are going to understand things that we don't know to make recommendations about what everybody should be doing. Of course, those plans shouldn't be implemented by force. And so how do we decide who's the right person? We need to decide this as a society. But what we really need, if we're going to put someone on stage with a Democrat and Republican who are all selling false solutions to real problems, is we need to offer real solutions to those problems. And if we can say, look, it's not the government's job, that's true, but that doesn't solve their problem and they're not going to vote for us. If we want to win over the Democrats and the Republicans, and that's the only way a libertarian is going to win, and that's the only way our society is going to become libertarian, we need to get them to understand the libertarian philosophy and ideologies and become libertarians. My campaign, Ken brought up a very interesting point about money spent. Most of the money that our campaign has spent has been outside of the libertarian circle. We don't do too well in the libertarian circle because we don't spend a whole lot of time talking to libertarians. We're turning Democrats and Republicans into libertarians. That's what we're really good at. That's how we win the election. That's what we need to do. Berman2020.com if you want to help out this campaign and join the movement. And also taxationistheft.cards is where you can get one of these really awesome hats.
little promotion there. All right. Thank you, everybody. Again, Brian, unmute yourself. Can we hear you? I don't think we can hear him. I'm going to add him if I can to the stream and remove myself. I just want to.
Don't know why you added me to the screen, but I guess I'm going to assume it's for plugs. So, at B. Nichols Liberty, you can find me on Twitter and on Facebook. Brian Nichols Show, you can find it anywhere you find podcasts. It's part of the We Are Libertarians Network. And, gentlemen, I'll speak for Kevin. Thank you all. It was a blast having you guys on. And, hey, I know he gave you guys the invite. I'm going to be the invite myself. Adam, you've never been on the show, but you're more than welcome to come back on. Dan, Sam, Ken, Mark, you're all welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. We'll do one-on-ones, dig deeper into some of these topics that we discussed here today. But it was a blast, guys. Thanks so much.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Pleasure, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.
See ya.
All right, I'm going to end the stream now.
Peace
Thank
and
you
love,
very much.
y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, guys.